Okay, hello everybody. Thank you all for coming out to our fifth workshop here on backend integration. I know it's midterm season, so great to see everyone that did turn up here. So here's the link to the slides and to the completed demo there, I believe. Yeah, can somebody drop the link to the slides? Okay, awesome. So yeah, it should be in the Discord as well. Okay, and then here is the ACM membership portal sign-in code. So yeah, if you're still interested in doing that, we'll leave this up for a couple minutes or a couple seconds. She's going to be doing the workshop with me. One of our awesome interns. Well, I guess cool interns. All right. Does anyone still need the code? Okay, awesome. Let's keep going. Okay, so applications for our beginner-friendly hackathon are still open. We've actually secured a date and a location for it now. So if you haven't applied and that's something that'd be interesting to you, be sure to either scan the QR code or click the first link there. And if you want to learn more about the hackathon, the second link there will take you to our website. Okay, so like I mentioned, this is our fifth session. It's on backend integration. So we're basically going to be using what we learned last time and the time before, and then visualizing the results on the front. Okay, so specifically today, we're going to be starting off by recapping what a server and a web API is. Okay, so what is a server? Does anyone want to take a shot at trying to explain it? Yeah, I kind of have some details here on the slide. So a server basically is just any computer that provides resources to another computer. So generally, we use the terminology of a client, which is requesting some sort of resource, and then the server basically responds with the requested resources. So here in this kind of little diagram, we have a client wanting to get a picture from a server. So it sends over a request, and then the server sends over the response, which includes the picture. Okay. So then if that's what a server is, what is an API? A lot of people kind of get these concepts confused. An API isn't anything really physical. It's more or less just like a contract between two programs that specifies like how they can communicate. So in the case of this example, we're trying to get an image. We are sending a GET request and specifying the specific picture that we want. And then and that's the kind of API that we're using, the GET request. And then the server responds because the client has followed that contract. Yeah, and then for web APIs, generally you'll see this term RESTful, which is basically just like a set of specific actions that must be in the API. So get, put, post, and delete. I think we talked about them last time, so feel free to review that if you're a little rusty. But yeah, and you can also have an API for programs that are running on the same computer. So for example, if you want to like write a file and you're writing C, you'd probably want to use some sort of like low-level API to do that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be RESTful. Okay, so getting a little bit more into the weeds for the specific image request, since this is what we're going to kind of be doing today, what we can see is that the request is comprised of like an HTML format. So specifically, it has the method that we're using, the target, which is the endpoint, right, the duck picture, and then the version of HTTP that we're using. And then it has a series of headers. In this case, we've only listed one. And then normally it has a body, but for GET requests, generally you don't include anything there. Okay. And then the response should include a version number for the HTTP version that the request is following, a status code for the request, as well as some status text that aligns with the status code. So in this case, it's getting the response properly, so it's 200. And then, yeah, there'll probably be some sort of headers again associated with the request. And then in this case, the body is the image data. Okay, any questions on that kind of idea, like how the request actually looks in the response? Okay, awesome. So yeah, last time we ended up kind of implementing some simple APIs and then testing them with Postman and curl. This time we're going to be using React Native. So we're just going to replace what we were doing on our client with React Native and our application. Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to Hannah for API requests.
Alrighty. All right, so now that we understand the back end, we need a way to connect our data with the front end of our app. So the best way we could do this, or one way we can do this, is with something called the Fetch API, which is a way to send and receive data to or from a URL somewhere else on the internet. The best way to do this, or easiest way to do this, is with the fetch method, and we need to specify where we want to get the data from and what we want to do with that data. So this is what a basic fetch request looks like. You can see that this first line is where we specify where we want to get the data, which is the URL. And the second line has like a response.json method. And that is important because the fetch method returns something called a response object, which is a representation of an entire HTTP response, not just the JSON data. And we just want the JSON data. So that's what this response.json is important for. There's a couple other aspects of this that are important, namely the async and await keywords. And in order to understand these, we need to understand something called promises. So a promise is an object that represents a future return of an asynchronous function. Honestly, it's kind of confusing, as I was confused when I first learned about it. It's basically just saying that like we don't have a value yet for what we're going to return, but we will in the future. The fetch method is an asynchronous function, and it returns a promise that is resolved with a response object. So I know it's a little confusing, so I have a little story to explain it better. So everybody knows Jack and Jill's story, hopefully. So we're gonna introduce some new characters. So these are Jack and Jill's grandparents. And Jack and Jill's grandparents asked them to go fetch some water. And Jack and Jill are like, we promise that we'll try. They don't originally have the water, so they're just saying that we're gonna go try and get the water. So they go up the hill to try and get the water. And there's two possibilities. They can either succeed and get the water, yay, or they can fall down the hill without getting water. This is representation of like a promise because a promise can either succeed in that it gets the data that it's supposed to get, or it can fail, like the case where Jack and Jill fall down the hill and don't get what they need. Something else that is important or interesting about this is, does anybody have an idea of what the grandparents are doing or could be doing while Jack and Jill are going to fetch the water? They can be doing something else. This is a really cool thing about asynchronous functions is that they kind of can run in the background of the rest of your program. So like if you have like a large amount of data or something you want to process, it doesn't get in the way of the execution of the rest of your function. So it's good for performance stuff. So we go back to our example, we can see that our log movies function is an asynchronous function, meaning that it can run independently from the rest of our program. And this await keyword pauses the execution of the rest of the function until the response is resolved, like that promise returns either a success, meaning they got the data, or a failure. And does anybody know why this might be important or want to take a stab at it? I know I kind of rambled, so also I can repeat anything if I didn't make a lot of sense. So it's important because these two lines at the bottom here, we don't want them to run until our promise is resolved. So until we get a notification back from wherever we're requesting the data from saying, hey, we got this data, or hey, we didn't get this data, because these two bottom lines won't run properly until we get that value. So something else the Fetch API can do is you can actually send data to a server with it as well, which is pretty interesting. The syntax is pretty much the same. There's just a few extra attributes you need to add. Mainly the method parameter. You just specify that you're posting data to wherever your specified URL is. And you have to pass a data object because you're sending data. So you need to specify what you want to actually send to the other spot on the internet. And then these two parts at the bottom with the bottom arrows, just lets the server know that you're sending JSON data. That's what this content type attribute is. And then the JSON.stringify data is what converts whatever data you have into JSON so you can send it the right way. Okay, and then Satyan's going to go on to use effect and use state, but is there any questions on that beforehand? I did ramble, so I apologize. Hope it made sense. Okay, cool.
Cool, yeah. So we're gonna be telling another story during this. So yeah, this time we're gonna go back to the restaurant analogy that we were using in the previous workshop. So let's just say you go to a restaurant, right? And then you sit down at a table, but nothing's happening. And so more than likely what you'll want to do is have some sort of waiter come to you so you can actually order your food. So let's just say in this scenario, right, you flag down your waiter and then they go get the food and then bring it back. And then once they bring it back, there's still like one other thing that they have to do, right? They have to put the food in front of you and give you your utensils. So yeah, kind of just summarizing those steps. We can break it down into the first step is you kind of telling your server like, hey, you need something, right? So go get the food and then bring the food to me. And then the second step is once the waiter has the food, they need to actually put it in front of you so that you can eat it. So kind of building off of this analogy, like doubling back to the Sounds Right application that we want to build, we can think of a user that logs on to somebody that sits down in a restaurant. They essentially are first interacting with the app, but they actually need to just get the songs so that they can visualize them. So we can kind of like with the restaurant analogy, break it down into two steps. The first step is actually going out and fetching all those songs, right? So we're going to be using the fetch function there. And then once we have the songs like stored on the app, we need to actually render them. Okay, so to do that, we're going to need a couple tools. So we're going to make use of these two React hooks. Specifically, the first one, use state, allows us to give components a notion of a state. We'll get into what that means in a second. And then use effect, which allows you to trigger a side effect at a particular point in time. Generally, this would be when state changes or when a component first mounts. And the side effect is essentially just a function. Okay, so let's get into why we actually need use state. So by default, React is pretty lazy, meaning that it will render everything once, and then it will attempt to never have to render anything again. So what we can do with useState is we're effectively telling React to basically like create a variable that is part of a component, so that if that variable changes, the component should re-render. So I have a little bit of an example here. Does anyone maybe you guys can take a little bit of time to quickly look through this and try to tell me what this code is, what kind of component this is, and like what it does. And this time we'll wait till somebody responds. Let me know if it's too small, though. I can make it bigger. We have time. We have time. No, not issue. Alrighty, so hopefully you've taken a look. Based off of the name, hopefully that should give you an indication that it's keeping track of some sort of count. And then if you look at what's actually being returned by this function, or the component, I guess, we can see there's some sort of button, and then within, like in the button, we have the text saying count is, and then we're rendering some sort of variable count. So what this component is supposed to do is create a button where if you click it, it will increase that count by 1. So effectively, if you click it 10 times, it'll say count is 10. So the problem with doing this with just a regular variable is that React will just render this once, and then it'll never update every time you click the button. So in order to make use of useState, the first thing we have to do is import useState at the top there. And then next, we can see on line 4 on the right-hand side of the assignment, we are calling the hook directly, right, useState, and then we're passing in the initial value for the variable, which in this case is 0, right? If you haven't clicked the button, we want the count to be 0. Then on the left-hand side of line 4 there, we are declaring the variable name count, and then a setter function that we will always use to modify that variable. So we'll never modify count directly. We'll always use that set count function. Okay. And then here on line 7, we can see we're making use of the button on click property there and setting it equal to a function that'll essentially call set count and basically pass in the new value, which is count plus 1. And then finally, we're making use of the curly braces there to render the count variable. Yeah, so when we click the button, it'll call set count, update the count, and then it'll trigger, it'll tell React to re-render the relevant components that use that variable, specifically this button tag here. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Okay, awesome. So then the other hook that we're going to need is use effect. So this allows you to run a side effect, which is essentially just a function whenever the component is first mounted or variable changes. So I have a bit of code here that is more or less the general idea for what we want for our app. So what we can see is we're in some way we're basically updating the okay, actually I left something off here, but it's okay. In some way we're updating the songs. So let's kind of break it down. The first line is just to import use effect and use state. Here within use effect, we can see that we're passing in a function using the arrow syntax. So if you're not familiar with this, basically the way it works is that we have a list of parameters in the parentheses here, and then an arrow, and then curly braces for the function if it has multiple steps, and then we can kind of write our function as you normally would. So in this case, our function only has one line, set song. So yeah, and then on the last line there, as the second parameter to use effect, we're plugging in a dependency list. So the way that works is that whenever anything in the dependency list changes, it will trigger use effect to call the first parameter, the function. So in this case, there's nothing in the list, right? So it'll only call when the site first renders or when the component first mounts. Okay, and then right here in the middle, that's where we want to call our asynchronous fetch function, and we're actually going to need to pass it in such a way. Like right now, this is just calling the use state setter. So this is going to have to be modified slightly so that we're actually calling the async fetch. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. So yeah, in summary, basically, first step, we need to fetch the song. So to trigger that, we're probably going to want to do it right when the user first logs in, and then update the state. And then the re-rendering will happen because the state is now updated, and we will a component will basically make use of the state variable. Okay, awesome. So I'll pass it off one more time.
So now that we are able to get our data, and set our data up using use state and use effect and our fetch method, we want to actually make it look pretty on our app. So one way we could do this, the way that we're going to do this is with components and props. So I know this was covered a couple weeks ago in our front-end workshop. So just as a recap, components basically let you split the user interface into independent reusable pieces. They're just functions that take in parameters called props, and they return React elements that tell React what to put on our screen. This is actually an example from the workshop a couple weeks ago. As you can see, there's like the capital P post is the component, and then it has like the lowercase p post as the prop, and it is using the prop that's passed in to set up some like views and text and stuff that we want to show on our screen. So basically what we're going to do is that we're going to pass the JSON values that we've grabbed with our fetch function and pass them as props to our components. So on the bottom there, I hope it's not too small, you can see this is a very basic example of how to do that. So we have our JSON data, and you just have a React component, and you have to set the data attribute in the React component to be our imported JSON data. Unfortunately, though, it's not always this simple. Does anybody know why? Ask question to the small crowd, but that's okay. So we're gonna go over it. So it's important because our JSON data has it's like an array of values, an array of elements and objects that we want to make use of. And the stuff on the last screen, I went too fast, is just like one prop. But if we want to like figure out more, if we want to do more with just object than just pass it as a prop, we need to make use of other methods. So in particular, we're gonna use something called a map method. So map calls a function on every element in an array and returns the results. So we can use this to render a post for every song element that we have in our database. So more of a conceptual example is, say there's like 5 people like who want to go on a hike and they have a set energy level at the beginning. That's what like the numbers beneath them are. And the hike is going to take half their energy away from them. So like the hiker energy function is like to divide their energy by 2. So the map function is just an easy way that we can like say that our function is dividing energy levels by 2. If we call map on this array of people, it'll return this array on the right bottom over there. That is the result of all of the elements with the function applied to them. This is more what it would look like in code, and kind of shows the map syntax. So we have like the start hike energy levels array, and then dot map, and then our function that we're passing into it. And then we define our function beneath it, just returning the hiker energies in each of the hiker energies in the start hike array and returning all of them. And you can see the final array at the bottom. This is kind of a small example, but it's something that helped me visualize it more. So we have our applicants array. This is like an example of like someone who wants to showcase a bunch of attributes about some applicants for something. I don't know, I just got it off the internet, so I don't really know what they want to show exactly, but I think it does a good job with the syntax and showing more of kind of what our JSON format is going to look like when we pass it as a prop. So the top part of this slide is the applicants array. It has like some information associated with each applicant. The bottom is the showcase applicants component, and you can see that we're passing our applicants array as a prop to this component. And then inside of our function for our showcase applicants, you can see we have the map function. I'm sorry, it is really small, but we have the map. You're doing something with each of the applicants in our applicant array and returning some different like sections, different elements with like the paragraph tags and stuff like that, using those elements, using the applicants in the array. Something that is important to note as well is this key attribute at the top here. The key attribute is like an identifier, a unique identifier for each element in your original array. And React basically just uses this to keep track of like if you have a element in your array that is updated, it knows to like render correctly when you put that data on your screen. You don't really need to know too much about it. There's more stuff online if you're interested, but it's just important to know that when you're doing a map function like this, your code won't work unless you have this key attribute in your code. Okay, so if there's not any questions, I think Satyan's gonna do a demo so we can see how this stuff applies to SoundRay.
Okay. So let's first look at the code that we have because we've added a little bit. This one, say that. Okay, there we go. We've added a little bit since last time. Oh, also, yep, I will do that. And I'll also change the theme because otherwise James is gonna get mad. He's like obsessed with this thing. Okay. Do you know what the shortcut is, like plus Control plus or Control Shift plus or something? There we go. Okay. How's the size? Okay. Okay. So yeah, we've modified the code a little bit since last we looked at the front end, which was a couple of weeks ago. So let's kind of look at it a little bit more closely. So we'll start with this app.js file here. So what we can see is we're still making use of the navigation tool components that we talked about during the front end workshop. But here we only have a single screen, and we can see that the component is pulling from this home screen, which is saved in the screens. So I'm going to right click this and click on go to definition to open up that file. The other way would be to just kind of go to the file itself, which is under screens, home screen. But this is a little faster. So yeah, let's take a look at what this file is doing. Let me also make this a little smaller. Oh, okay. I guess not then. Oh, there. Okay, awesome. So let's look under return to try to see what this app will look like, and then we'll run it, and then we'll kind of get into adding the new features that we want. So we can see we have some sort of kind of container view, and within that, we should have a little bit of text here that renders the title of the site. And then we have a little bit of logic that says if we're loading, then render this loading. Otherwise, basically, assuming these conditions are met, render null. Otherwise, render no songs available. And then at the bottom here, we have some logic to handle if there's a new post. And we'll get to kind of the specific details in a second. But at a high level, does that kind of make sense for the structure of the app? Okay, let's go ahead and run it. And I think hopefully some of those parts will make a little bit more sense. I don't know why I have these open. Okay, so first things first, we gotta navigate to the correct directory. So I'm gonna do cd for change directory. This one here, and then I think it's session 5 live, like that. And then I need to come into the front end folder, and then run npm start. Okay, give that a second to run. Make sure. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so since I'm on a Windows machine, I have to use Android Studio. I'm a Mac person. But yeah, so everything should be running. So once this kind of gives us the green light, I'm going to go ahead and select the Android option. Just give it a second. Actually, while that's running, let's go ahead and run the backend. So I'm going to create a new terminal by clicking the plus here, and then navigate into the correct directory. So session 5, live, and then backend. And then npm start. And we haven't actually connected anything to the backend yet, right? That's what this whole workshop's about. So this won't do anything yet, but we can see that it does run fine. And we'll get into the code in a second too. Okay. Okay, it's still starting. Let's give it another second or two. Has anyone run into any trouble like trying to set something like this up on their own? If so, feel free to stick around after and we can try to help. Okay, while this runs, let's go ahead and look at the backend code. Actually, hold on. Looks like it's done. Okay, great. So it basically says everything's ready to go. And then it asks what kind of way we want to display the app. So I'm going to press A to open Android. I'm going to click in the terminal first. Okay. There we go. And if we switch over here, you can see it should open up. Oh my God. Why is this so slow? Okay, actually, let me plug my laptop. That's what. Okay, we can see that the app is running, right? There's nothing in the middle rendered. And then, but it does have that title and it does have a plus sign there that we'll be using in a second. So if we click on this plus sign, it should open up a little pop-up here. This is the kind of interaction. Oh, sorry. Menu that allows you to add new posts. So you can add in a title and an artist and then click post. And ideally, this would interface with the backend, add our data there, and then it should render the songs here. But I've already actually added a song to the database. So if we go back to pgadmin and run this this command up here, the SQL command that will grab all the entries in the songs table, we can see we do have a single entry here, right? So it should be rendered, assuming we connect to the database. So let's go ahead and actually implement the way to connect to the database. So first things first, if we look under backend and click on index.js, we can see what the database actually should look like, or sorry, the endpoints for the database look like. So the one we're going to want to leverage is this one right here. So this allows us to get all the songs, which is exactly what we want, so that we can render the song. So we can see that it doesn't really seem to require any parameters, right? This request here is not actually being used anywhere in the function in the endpoint implementation. So it doesn't really, we don't need to pass in any parameters for this request, other than calling the correct endpoint, right? And then making sure it's a GET request. So let's head back to the home screen file here. And what we'll want to do is update this fetch songs function to call that endpoint and then save the data in this songs variable. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so first things first, let's make this an asynchronous function since it's going to be using that fetch method. And then, or function, I should say. And then in here, we'll modify this to first use fetch. And then we are going to have to pass in the correct URL. So in this case, it'll be, because the database is running on my local machine, something to the effect of localhost, and then port, and then the specific endpoint. So right now, I've actually, under this utils.js file, I've specified this is my local IP, which actually it may have changed. But we'll run with this for now and then we'll see. So I can just copy this, or if I go back to the home, this one here, I'm actually importing it right here. So I can do something like this. Well, so this will go ahead and use that variable, and then I can write slash. Okay, so this here should basically make that get request to the right endpoint. Okay, then the next line would just be to get the data from the JSON payload. So data equals which response.json, like that. And then all we need to do is basically update the songs variable to have the data. So if you recall, we actually need to make use of useState. So we'll do something like this. And then we can use useState. Right, so by default, we don't have any songs, hence an empty array. And then in here, something like set songs data. Right, so once we get the data, we're just updating the song list. Okay, and then for completeness, we will also wrap this in a try catch block. So something like this. Yeah. And then here we can just log the error if we get one. Okay. Failed to fetch songs. Okay, great. So now we have a function that can fetch our songs, but we're not actually calling it anymore. So what we need to do next is make use of useEffect to say, once we've logged in, like once we've run the app, let's actually fetch our songs. So yeah, looks like we have the import up here. So I'm just going to call useEffect, and then as the first parameter, we want to plug in a function, and then in the function we just want to say fetch songs, like this. And what we can do is we can actually use this then function that since this fetch songs is asynchronous, it'll return a promise. And this then function allows us to do something once the promise completes. So we can write then basically run this function that we're plugging in. And this will just say set loading false like this. And to do that, we're also going to have to modify loading to use state. Okay, there we go. So now the site will be marked as not loading once we fetch the songs. And we can also add a catch block here. So we'll just say do this. And then like that. Okay, cool. So assuming the IP address and everything else we did is correct, this should work without any issues. But once we've stored the songs in this variable, if you scroll down, you'll see that we're not actually rendering the songs. We're checking to see if the songs are not null and they have some sort of length. And if that's the case, we're just returning null. So we need to replace this null with a way to render the songs. And this is where we're going to leverage that map. So what we want to do is something like songs.map. And then we're going to pass in a function here. So this function basically is saying for each song in our songs array, I should say songs, then run this, like return whatever this function returns. So actually we can do it without a function here. We can do it like this. Something like this. So what this is going to do is it's going to say for each song in our array, specifically, then create a post entry. So for each post entry, what we want to do is use the props to specify the song name, the song image, whatever other details we want to associate with the song. So specifically for us, we have to provide a key so that we know what like React can kind of keep track of each of the entries in the map array. So this will probably be song.id. And this, if we look back in our database, we can see song.id should be a unique value. And then we can also pass in the actual song details. So we'll do that with the post prop. And then we will also pass in the user ID, which should just be the user ID. Okay, so if you want to know where I'm coming up with these specific props, you'd want to look at the actual post component here that we've already implemented for you guys. But if we scroll up enough, we can see that we do need to pass in a post and a user ID since these are used down here in the actual body of the post. Okay, any questions so far? All right, let me go ahead and save this. And then if we go back to the app, if we open up the terminal again quickly first, and make sure that everything is okay on the front end side. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of close out. Give it a second. I'm going to close. Oh, not going to do that. I'm going to close the app here because it's a little finicky sometimes, and then reopen it. Okay, and we'll see if it renders. If not, okay, so it's not able to render anything, right? So let's try to figure out what the problem is. I'm pretty sure it has to do with the IP address. Normally I would just specify localhost, right, in place of this. But because I'm using Android Studio, it doesn't work out that way perfectly. Give me 1 second. So the way that I was able to get my actual IP address, it should be pretty straightforward. I think you can just run a command in the terminal, but I don't remember off the top of my head what the command is. Let me see. If any of the officers happen to know, that would be good. If not, just give me a second to look this up. IP config, you said? do I have to, where do I run that? In my terminal? Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, that's exactly right. That's so what we can see here is that this lists off all of our IP details, and if we scroll down, this should be the one that we want here. So if I copy that, and then head back over here, we can see it's clearly not the same, because this is the one that I used when I was at home. Okay, let's go ahead and save this, and then switch back over, and thank God, we can see it does actually render. Okay, so this, hopefully you won't have to do this if you're using a Mac. You can just literally write localhost, like that. But if you're a Windows dude like me, I guess you're stuck with this crap. Okay. So yeah, any questions on how we were able to actually interface with the database and render some sort of content here? Okay, awesome. So I don't know why it's saying that request failed, but we'll ignore that for now. I think that's old from the previous request. Now what we want to do is actually have some sort of way to interact with the app to add a new song. So if I click plus and then type some details in here, right, and post, it should actually send out the data to the database. So to do that, we're going to have to update this new post component here. So let's quickly look at what this is doing. So if we scroll through, we can see that in the return statement, we have two text inputs, right? And if we look at the props, we can see that the value is being stored in the artist and the title of the page. Right, and this corresponds to the user typing in a title and typing in an artist. And if we scroll up, we can see that these are actually making use of that use state hook. Right. So the idea is when the user types something, it uses this onChange text prop, which is using that setter function so that it can update that state variable. And then down here we have the two buttons, right? This one here, the first one is for actually posting. We can see it renders this post text, and then the bottom one is for canceling. So the key here is that when we have an on press prop here that we're plugging in this handle post function into. So ideally, this handle post function should be making a call to our database to go out and write the data for the new post. So if we scroll up, we can see we have one declared here, but it's not doing anything. So we're going to go ahead and implement this one. Okay, so first things first, we probably want to make sure that the user actually typed in a title and an artist, right? So what we can do is write an if statement, just saying if not title or not artist, meaning one of them is empty, then return. Right, so we're just saying don't actually send out any data if the user didn't type anything in. Okay, next, we probably want to create a representation of what the new post should look like. So we can say const new post equals, and then this will basically have artist like this. It should have the title, and then it should also have our user ID. So we can say user ID. So right now our user ID is just like hard coded, right? Because we didn't log in. But ideally, there should be a user ID associated with each post. And if we look at our database, we can see it does expect a user ID, an artist title, and then there's a date field that'll be kind of auto-filled in. And then the lights can also be auto-filled in as 0, as well as the ID. Okay, everyone following so far? Okay, so then once we have this, the next step is to actually send this new post out. So we're going to, again, wrap this in a try catch block. Okay, so I'm going to say try. And then what we want to do is basically send out the request. So we're going to say const response, just like last time, equals await fetch. And then here we have to use the correct endpoint. So again, we're going to use localhost, in this case, my IP URL. And then we need to figure out what the endpoint should be to send out a new post. So let's go back and look at the index.js file. And if we scan through, we can see we have an endpoint here that it's tagged here with create a song. And we can see that it's a post request. So we're posting out some data. And with that line, we can see that the actual SQL that's running is inserting into the songs table with the artist, title, and user ID, and date, I guess, in this case. But we can see it's actually setting the date here. And then it's returning the data once it does it. Another thing to note here is that this line signifies that it's using the request body to extract these three fields, right? And these are the three fields that we created when we created our new song representation on the front end. So if we head back to new post, what we want to do is write /songs, and then make sure that it's a post request. So we're going to have to pass in a some of the specification parameters here as the second argument to the fetch request, to the fetch function. So we're going to make use of that method parameter here. So post, and then headers. We want to specify the type of the document body. So we will say content type, and then it should be application JSON, right? Because we're going to be sending our data in JSON format. And then finally, body for the actual post to send out. And this will just be like this. So this is converting the whatever we pass into a JSON format, and we're just going to pass in the new post. Don't need that there. Should be here. Okay. So hopefully this block of code here should make sense. We're sending out a request to that insert endpoint, with making sure it's a post request, so it hits the right endpoint. And then we're passing in the actual details of the post in the body of the request. Okay. So next here, we're just going to write, we're going to make sure that the request actually completed. So we're just going to say if not, okay, like this. Then we want to basically find an error. Something like this. So what this is just saying is that once we get the response, make sure that the response is actually okay, right? Otherwise, tell us that there was a problem. And then otherwise, we want to update our front end so that it reflects the new change. Right. So to do that, what we're going to want to do is write const something like this. So here we're basically waiting for the response. We're converting the response body or the response to JSON, and then storing the result in created song. Basically just allowing us to keep track of what the new song actually created looks like with the correct ID and other auto-generated details. Okay, and then finally, what we want to do is run. I guess we can go ahead and log this. So log song, and finally, we're actually going to make use of a parameter that we're passing into new post here, this on post function. So right on post like that. So this, if we look at what's actually being plugged in the home screen, we can see here we're plugging in this fetch songs function. So this is going to tell the home screen to go out and grab the list of updated songs from the database. Okay, and then before we wrap up, we still need to add a catch block here. So we'll go ahead and do that like this. And then in this, we can just say arrow posting song. And then we probably want to run a finally block. And this is just going to basically close that window, right? So once, like back on the front end, whether or not the song actually creates, we probably want this window to close, especially if the song is created. So we can just write handle close. And this is going to call it'll call the same function that actually pressing the close button will to close that window. Okay, so if we save this file and then not that file, this file here, we can actually go ahead and test this. So we'll just give it a title test, and then artist will be cool artist. Oh, sorry. Okay, not great. Okay, let me go ahead and close the app and reopen it. That's my fail safe with Android Studio. It's a little bit finicky. Sorry about that. Okay, back here. Okay, give it a second to open. Okay. Hmm. Okay. Okay. Well. Okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and stop this. Stop the server and reopen the server. Okay. Not great. Okay. Looks like it's on at least. Let's go ahead and run this one more time. But yeah, hopefully once this is since this is all done, what we can do is just click that button, add in the post details, and then we will see the new post created. Okay. There we go. Let's press A for Android. Come on. Seriously. Okay. Okay, let's open this on as oh, okay, I don't have that installed. Um, yeah, good point. Let's check. It doesn't look like it. Okay, I'm gonna just turn the phone off and turn it back on. We gotta try turning it off and on again. Oh. Otherwise, we can also run it as a web app, and do it that way. Sorry, bear with me for this. npm start again. So we'll try running it as an Android app, and if it's not working, we'll do it as a web app. Okay. You know, let me just close it and reopen it because it's not even turning on, and I'm not even running the app anymore. I can. Oh, okay. It looks like it's done. Okay. So, yep. Just gonna run that, and then fingers crossed for this one. Okay. Okay. Thank God, it's at least turning on. Give it a second. Okay. So once it finishes starting up, we will Okay, there we go. Let's close out of Xfer here. There's a chance that something, maybe I wrote something wrong. Maybe there's an error somewhere. So let's go ahead and press A and try to open it up here on the Android again. If it's still not working, we will try the web. And if it's not working, then we will quickly look through, see if I wrote something wrong. Okay, there we go. So it looks like it was just buggy. Because everything seems to be working. So let's click plus this time. I'll keep it short. We'll just go with T and A. Okay, we're just gonna switch it up. A and T. And then click post. And we can see, voila, we have a new post, right? And if we go back to the database and run this, we can see we do have a new entry in our database. Okay, so yeah, I mean that more or less wraps up all that we have for this week. I have some basically the stuff that we did here on the slides. Yeah, and if you want more information, that link there should have the running demo that we're doing. So it should have the completed version of the demo that we just did today. Yeah, but apart from that, thank you all for coming out. I know it's tough. It's week 6. And next week we're gonna be getting into how to actually do user authentication and like store passwords securely and all that fun stuff. So yeah, if you have any questions, do feel free to come up here. But other than that, I guess have a great rest of your night. Thanks.